Welcome, everybody. To get us started, I have a couple of housekeeping announcements. First off, if you want to ask a question, please make sure to use the chat feature, and we'll do our best to either address it during the webinar or we will connect you with our speakers afterwards. Next, if you're here to receive CE or CLE credit, just a note, we will not be offering Georgia or Montana CE credit. Washington is still up in the air, so we'll let you know if we're offering that. You must answer all three polling questions, which are randomly dispersed throughout the webinar. And then you also must stay on the entire hour of the webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at mgilmore@constangy.com. And with that, I will hand it over to Yogi.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. I am Yogi Letfus, the Director of Business Development with the Constangy Cyber Team, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. In this session, we'll explore the growing role of APIs in the modern business operations and why they have become an increasingly important focus for cybersecurity, legal, and compliance teams. We'll discuss common API security risk, review real-world incident examples, and examine the legal and regulatory considerations organizations need to be aware of. Most importantly, we'll provide practical guidance for identifying and managing API risk while aligning technical safeguards with business, legal, and compliance objectives. We are extremely fortunate today to have two incredibly knowledgeable experts presenting to us, and I have the pleasure of introducing those. We'll start off with Maria Efaplomatidis. Now, Maria told me I was going to need a long session before I'd be able to say that name properly, but I'm doing my best there, Maria. Maria is a partner in our New York office and a member of our cybersecurity team. She has her CIPP and in her previous practice represented insurance carriers in complex accounting and securities litigation matters. She enjoys exploring New York City with her family and is often at the ice rink cheering on her son's hockey team. And as a bonus, as a Greek American, she will voluntarily plan your next trip to Santorini. So anytime you're looking for some travel advice, Maria's the one to do it with. She's also a great partner in crime to have characterists done with. I've had the pleasure of being at an event for that. So. We're also joined today by Candice Wendt. Candice is the Senior Director of Incident Response and Threat Intelligence team at Quorum Cyber, with over 10 years experience in incident response and digital forensics. She's a GIAC Network Forensics Analyst and a GIAC Certified Incident Handler. Candice enjoys spending time on the golf course and is known for being a skilled poker player. When it comes to books, her favorite audio book is A Project Hail Mary, a captivating science fiction adventure by Andy Weir. I want to thank you both for joining us today. And before I hand over to Candice to get us started, we're going to hit right off with one of the polling questions to see if everybody's awake. So, our first polling question today is, how familiar are you with APIs in your day-to-day work? Single answer choice. Answer one, very familiar. I work with or advise on them regularly. Number two, somewhat familiar. I understand the concept, but not deeply. Answer three, heard of APIs, but not sure how they apply to me. And answer number four, not familiar at all. Polling question one, how familiar are you with APIs in your day-to-day work? Very
And
familiar, somewhat familiar, heard of APIs, not familiar at all.
Yogi, jumping in here just to remind everyone, if you are looking for CE or CLE credit, you must complete all of the polling questions. So please make sure to get your answers in.
Perfect. How are we going for time there, Madison?
Give
I
it
was
just a few more seconds. We're at 84%.
I was waiting for Sean's joined us. Sean, welcome. I was waiting for you to start the music, Sean.
I was thinking about that, but I just want, first of all, I want to thank you, Yogi, for getting me started. And I really want to thank Maria and Candice for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to this.
Awesome. Well, I will go ahead and end this poll and we'll see what the results are.
Perfect. Candice, we'll hand over to you to kick us off. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining today. Hopefully a good discussion on API security and why it matters. Um, First off, I think it's good to get an understanding of not of what an API is, but why is it important? And if you could go to the next slide. You'll probably see a lot of logos here that you are familiar with. Why API is important now, especially now in the modern day, is because they affect everything that we do on the day-to-day. Every single platform that you work with very likely has an API. And they are basically the connectors between what we do, what the platforms do, how they talk to each other. They kind of connect everything. If you think of like a spider web, they're kind of like the things that link everything together. They are an automated, programmatic way of communication between platforms. And so when we talk about, let's say, like using Salesforce or Relativity or things like that, how scripts interact with things, that is all through what we would call an API. So when you really think about it, even joining the Zoom meeting, for example, you've probably interacted with dozens of APIs today, and you just don't know it. And so why it's extremely important right now is because you don't see them, but you use them all the time, which means that they are also an avenue that attackers can use as well. Next slide. So what exactly is it, right? Like I said, if you think about the spider web, they are a way that systems and people can exchange data. So if in its basic form, if I want to input data into a database, generally speaking, it would go through an API. If systems want to pull data from another system, it would typically go through an API. So if I'm entering in my name, date, social security number, et cetera, an API is likely grabbing that and sticking it into the database. If someone wants to retrieve that information, then they are using the API to say, hey, database, give me the information for Candice. And that information would be returned as long as all the authorization is met. And so it basically is the gateway to all of the data that we store in all of these platforms. And if you remember all the logos, you probably see why there may be a very high risk with an insecure API, because those platforms store very sensitive data, critical business data, personal information. Pretty much anything needed to operate a business in the modern day is stored in a platform that you probably has an API and uses APIs to transfer and communicate between other systems. So when an API is insecure, it's not just, oh, we've got a bug in the system. It can blossom into this huge, issue where that now you have a cybersecurity issue. You've got data exposure. You're breaking your contracts. You've got regulatory issues and things like that, all because of this programmatic, unseen communication stream that you had no control over to begin with, is insecure. So that is why I think APIs specifically have become a pretty heavy target in what we're seeing from an incident response stance, because they don't have to interact with a user, for example. So, and actually, if you can move to the next slide, in a traditional incident where we're talking about, let's say, phishing. It requires a user to click on a email or a link and then being socially engineered into giving up their password somehow. The API of abusing an API that's insecure kind of negates all of that. They can just send or script code that can pull the data from the database directly without any need to interact with people. There may be some authentication that they may have to scrape at some point, but with a truly insecure API or even just like a bug in the system that allows attackers to use APIs to access data, they don't have to go through any person. So it's a different type of attack. It's automatable, so because it's all scripted, I have personally seen cases where terabytes of data are leaving an environment through the API. It's usually a less monitored stream of communication, because if you restrict that communication, you're restricting business operations. So a lot of times there's not a lot of detections around high API use. It's built to handle a lot of requests. So how do you differentiate good requests from bad requests is the battle of cybersecurity. So they are absolutely meant to transfer a lot of data, and there are very little guardrails around what's good data, what's a bad request, things like that. The other thing that we're running into is ownership of the API. So I use Salesforce as an example of this because there was recently a Salesforce vulnerability, but Salesforce itself has an API that's maintained by Salesforce. No company that utilizes Salesforce has ownership over that. So if there is an issue with Salesforce API where an attacker can go in and pull data, you are reliant then on Salesforce to provide you information to see if that issue's fixed and things like that. So that is completely out of your hands as far as attainment goes. So remediating that becomes much more difficult. It becomes a much slower response, which allows the attacker to pull more data. So APIs are a very valuable tool for us to use on a business day to day. It certainly makes everything that we do, including things like this meeting, possible. Our instant communication, our ability to retrieve data very quickly is all thanks to APIs. But that also works on the flip side, where you have attackers that are abusing this and finding loopholes and ways to use APIs to pull sensitive data. And I think the next slide is an example of this, and I will turn it over to Maria.
Thank you, Candice. Yeah, this is a great example. It dates back to 2022, and the Optus data breach, right? In Australia, this is really demonstrating one of the largest data breaches, and also speaks to some of the points that Candice just made about APIs, and just it doesn't have to be the most sophisticated attack. It could be kind of a simple misconfiguration. But what we're showing here with this slide here is that the effects of an API data breach are huge, right? The large scale impact here in this example, Optus, it affected 10 million customers, current and former. It was widely reported as involving API or external facing control failure. And this is, I think there's more recent examples too. I think, 2025, even as recent as this month, I believe, where, API is rearing its ugly head and showing us some really large scale impacts in terms of data breach, in terms of numbers, right? In terms of how many people can be affected by data that is sitting behind an API. So I think of API as a very sneaky sort of place where large scale data breaches can occur and have occurred. So that's what we're illustrating here with this slide.
I think
next
too
slide,
that
please.
I think Optus, like, they're still facing lawsuits to today, right? So we're what, 2026? So I think they had like watchdog lawsuits and class action lawsuits, and so it's definitely long reaching.
It's one of those events where, there's lessons learned, but it certainly haunts you. And then, it's happening again, right? Through another API. So it is kind of, you're in this vicious cycle of legal consequences.
Yeah. Yeah, and from the technical side, first of all, I'll state outright, they never came out and confirmed that it was an API issue. And I don't think they ever will unless those documents are released. But it is widely purported to be that way. It was not necessarily like a sophisticated, we were talking about earlier how ransomware has become extremely sophisticated in some ways where social engineering has taken a step up. Now they're impersonating people using AI, and how they sit on networks and they have to, live off the land and they have to bypass EDR. Like those are complex attack paths, right? Where with an API that is vulnerable, it is not complex at all. You literally craft a script that in a specific way that accesses the vulnerability, and it really truly it just sends the data to you. We've seen it happen, obviously in incident response. We've post-mortem done investigations on it. We've seen millions and millions and millions of lines of data transferred over the course of hours. And so it's a faster way. I mean, it's probably harder to find. You'd have to find these vulnerabilities. Again, like ransomware, there's tons of groups out there just scanning, searching for these vulnerabilities, things like that. We had a pretty well-known clothing retailer that had an API issue. Now they had a homegrown system, so they had a dev team. They built their own system. They introduced a bug, and they had didn't know about it until basically they got extorted for the data. But it was quickly remediated thereafter. But the data's gone. So at that point, and it was I think 11 terabytes of data pulled from their database in the course of 2 days. So and they had no idea. There was no monitoring around it. There was no, because they expect millions of customers to be coming to their service and buying things and looking at things, and all of that's API based activity. So, they regularly see millions and millions of activity lines, accessing their API. So seeing a download, or seeing someone using the API to pull data kind of masks itself in the normal activity. Now, if had they taken a closer look or had the proper detections, could they have seen it? Probably. Seeing, 11 terabytes of data go to one IP address probably is not normal for a normal customer. But who knows to look for that, right? And that's where we are today, right? Where the awareness around this is not as robust as ransomware. Everyone now, 5-10 years ago, no one had ransomware tabletops. No one had discussions on ransomware preparedness. No one knew that you could negotiate with a threat actor, right? That's all like stuff we had to learn, or our clients had to learn through pain and suffering, really, or just really hard focus on proactive cybersecurity. API does not have that at all. So like we kind of take it for granted. I mean, we use it every day. We don't even notice. The developers know a lot about it, but we don't. There's, I mean, hardly any documentation on their own APIs in general. So it's become kind of a new avenue. I would say new. It's become a little bit more of a popular avenue for attackers to get data as customers start and clients start to better their defense on their internal network. So it's harder to get into an internal network. How else can they make money? Oh, look at this. There's this new battlefield that's relatively untouched that we can exploit. So we saw Optus in 2022. It's still going on today.
Right, we'll jump into the next polling question. Polling question number 2. Where do you think the biggest API-related risk comes from? Single choice. Choice 1, external attackers exploiting vulnerabilities. Choice 2, weak internal controls or misconfigurations? Answer number three, third-party or vendor integrations. Or answer number four, lack of visibility for inventory of APIs. Give you a few seconds for those. Where do you think the biggest API related risk comes from? External attackers exploiting vulnerabilities, weak internal controls or misconfigurations, third-party vendor integrations, or lack of visibility or inventory of APIs.
Alrighty, about 10 more seconds to get your answers in. Awesome. And here are those results.
Okay, most of you, we have 20% think that external attackers exploiting vulnerabilities. We have 42% weak internal controls or misconfigurations, 18% third-party vendor integrations, and 20% of folks lack of visibility or inventory on APIs. Candice, what do you think about that?
I think that's a good spread, and I
Yeah,
think all of them are relevant, to be honest.
I agree. I agree.
So, when we talk about, and I know we covered a lot of this already, so when we talk about kind of where those key security failures are, all four things on that list apply in some way, shape, or form, right? So if you don't know, for example, how an API works or integrates and you develop something around it, you have an opportunity to introduce a vulnerability, right? So from the point of development all the way to the use of that API by consumers like us, there's so many ways that it could fail. And there is very little monitoring done around API use because of the volume, the sheer volume, right? But I will say most APIs require some sort of authorization, so authentication. Usually that's in the form of a key or sometimes username, password even. So when you log into your bank account, for example, you're entering your username, password, it generates a token that allows you to talk to the banking platform that's using an API. So every use of, well, not every is a bad word. A lot of use of APIs require some sort of form of authentication to say, hey, I'm an authorized user to do this. Now, with every type of authentication, there's always issues, right? One of the biggest issues with APIs in general is just one, they have to be internet facing. Well, as we know from very long-term lessons with RDP, you don't want that internet facing. Why? Because it's so easily accessible. It's the same thing with an API. It has to be interfacing so that it can work. That is already increasing the attack surface infinitely because the internet's enormous. And it allows, you're basically exposing your door to the world, right? Whether that door is closed, locked, how locked it is, how secure it is, doesn't matter. It's exposed. And then behind that door is all of your sensitive data, all of your business critical data, anything that you really wouldn't want to release. So you've got this API that can translate through the door, and then you have a lock-in key on one side, and then all your data housed on the other side. So when you really think about it that way, you're putting a lot of trust into this unseen digital communication platform that you have no control over, right? And so it's definitely something that can scale really, really, really fast. And so I kind of wanted to bring up here too is like how that plays downstream, right? And Maria, you can kind of fill in some of
Yeah.
this too, where what we're seeing, especially is in insurance claims, where now we have data exposure through an API, it can increase the cost of those claims down the line. So now when when you're talking about ransomware, they got in, they took 50 gigs, 100 gigs, 20, now you're basically exposing an entire database. So this could balloon into terabytes of data very, very, very quickly, which then increase your costs down the line. And that's just one aspect of this, but I'll turn it to you because that's not an area that I'm super familiar with, but I imagine you're seeing that as well.
Yeah, I think, Candice, the takeaway here is that, you know, we're trying to navigate AI, right? And every day there's something new to learn about it. And then here comes APIs, right? With the large scale impact. I think that when you're talking about insurance and carriers and awareness, right? And the buzzword for me is control, right? Like, how do you control the risk? How do you control potential exposure? And I think that it's got to be, that first line of defense, right? Even with insurers, asking insureds or potential insureds, going through the security questions and saying, are you aware that, there is API being used, right? Like, number one, right? Just take inventory of that, maybe audit that, right? Know exactly, because how many times have, a lot of the attorneys that are listening in today, you ask a client, well, do you have data? Do you store data? And is it sensitive? And a lot of times they're not sure, right? Or maybe they'll say, no, definitely not, nothing sensitive here. But then are you using API? And is that sort of hidden, like you said, it's a whole other battlefield. And it is a little hidden and it is silent, and it doesn't take much to exploit it. So I think it should become, a very, put it at the top of the agenda, right? When you're talking about risk and potential exposure, even, day one from an insurer to an insured or a potential client, definitely make it part of the conversation.
And I think too, it also brings in very heavily third party contractual obligations. One thing that we've seen too is
Yeah.
if the API that was abused was owned by a third party, what rights does our client have to anything, really? Like, do they have a right to know how the third party is managing that risk too? And that's pretty much always a gray area. I feel like I don't know what you've seen, but like I feel like contractually that's not really an area that's covered. I know security incidents sometimes are, but like if there is an issue with the software itself and it causes damage to your client, how does that work, you know?
Yeah, and it's not always explicit in a specific contract. It should be, right? And it should become, because what we're going to see in the next couple of slides is all the laws that do guide us when there's a potential data breach, federal, state. But you're right to bring up contractual obligations, and oftentimes there is a silent agreement, but I think that's part of, what to do going forward, right? In terms of making it part of the conversation, but also making it explicitly part of the contract.
Yeah, yeah. Probably a good segue to the next one then.
Yeah.
Oh, AI. Okay, actually, it looks like we kind of flipped this. So AI. Um, AI, I like to describe AI as an amplifier. That's pretty much it. It enhances what we can do as human beings, ultimately. So it's a tool. And kind of liken it to, I'm pretty much old enough now to remember when there were no computers and things like that. So when computers and the internet first came out, everyone was kind of like, oh my gosh, like this is half the world's like, this is a terrible thing, and half the world is a great thing. And I feel like we're kind of at the same spot with AI right now, where half the world's like, oh my gosh, it's consuming all the power. This sucks. This is terrible. And half the world's like, this is the next, this is the next best thing that's going to hit us from a technology standpoint. We're already seeing it start to impact many industries. My husband actually is a software developer who is seeing it impact pretty much everything, as you know, with AI and Claude and AI development and things like that. So it's definitely going to have a big impact. But in every case, AI amplifies what we can do. I'm pretty sure everyone on this call, or most people on this call, have used AI as a high form of Google, right? So ask it, how do I cook this? How do I do this? What do I do when my kid is being naughty? Like all that stuff, like that, it basically searches faster and provides information faster than you can gather it yourself. Um, in the same way, AI can amplify our attackers' tasks at hand as well. So, development of those scripts that we're talking about that can pull or identify or pull data from an insecure API. Now someone can get on Claude and say, hey, I want to craft this API or craft this, script to pull this data from this place. And within 30 seconds, they have a script. Within about an hour, they probably can get it running pretty well, or at least well enough. I imagine we're going to start to see a lot of cases with minors or the younger generation playing around with this. I actually recently just had a case where a college student somehow got his hands on some internal data from the college that he shouldn't have had. And so, I think AI is enabling us to do a lot of things a lot faster, but that works against us too in the cybersecurity stand, right? So now you can automate finding insecure APIs. You can automate pulling from those APIs. And now you don't even need programming knowledge to do it, right? So you can just tell a computer or an AI system, hey, I want this. And within a minute, you'll have it. And you just need to know how to run it. Oh, and if you don't know how to run it, you can ask AI and it'll tell you how to run it. So, it's something that I think we need to prepare for. I think it's going to open the door to a lot of different types of attacks, a lot of different ideas or strategies that we are not accustomed to seeing because, essentially this is a creative way AI provides a creative way to come up with these types of solutions or attacks. So it's going to widely increase the attack surface, I think. Yeah.
Polling question number 3. Who owns the API in your organization today? This will be a very interesting one. Answer 1, single choice here too. IT and security team. Legal, compliance. Shared responsibility across departments and not clearly defined. Polling question 3, who owns the API in your organization today? Single choice. First answer, IT/security team. Answer number 2, legal/compliance. Answer number 3, shared responsibility across departments. Answer number 4, not clearly defined.
I think it's Yogi.
So it's not clearly defined. We really do need some background music. Maybe if you had said karaoke, Candice, instead of golf, you would have got the job.
Oh, trust me, you don't want to hear me sing.
I've got the Jeopardy tune in my head.
Yeah. Okay, results are in. Who owns the API in your organization today? 43% said the IT and security team. 5% said legal compliance team. 28% said it was a shared responsibility across departments. And 25% said not clearly defined. Any comments on those, you two?
I think that pretty much reflects reality of really what people think. Truly, like in outside of this meeting and whatnot. I think that it's not something that historically someone has ever had true ownership over. Um, it really just depends on the organization. It depends on how they're structured. And, one would even say like the true owner of an API is the dev team, but the dev team would probably say something very different. So,
Yeah,
I think there is some truth to that. No one really knows.
I agree, Candice. And I think that, that's part of the problem, right? Like who's the
Hmm.
custodian, who's in possession of the data. And again, understanding what everyone's role is and responsibility is about the data. And then it's always fun when a client has like a merger or acquisition in the middle of something like this. And it's like, okay, now where did that responsibility go? And was it assumed? And so definitely complicates things. But here in this slide, we're looking at legal and compliance implications. I think we touched on a few already, making it crystal clear that API risk is not just a technical issue. With the example of the Australia case earlier, and not just Australia, I think I read somewhere where, and I'll cite the statistic later if I have to, but it's like something like 75% of organizations are seeing something, affecting their API, not necessarily resulting in a data breach, but certainly something that has caused a problem for them, right? Causing them some financial losses, reputational damage, or probably both. So in terms of, security measures, and Candice, you could speak to this if you want to, but it has to be built into the API design and deployment, right? And we're thinking about this and we're always like talking about how it's like kind of easy. It doesn't take the most sophisticated cyber criminal out there to exploit API. And so that, that kind of asks the question, well, are we doing enough, in terms of security measures inherently in the API design? And then the second point here is about vendor and processor relationships. And I think that goes to the question of, again, like whose responsibility is it? Who's being held accountable here in terms of the risk that comes with using API. Boards, executives should be thinking about this, should be treating API as part of their overall enterprise risk oversight, thinking of it in terms of corporate data governance. It's kind of bleeding into, a lot of the issues that boards are currently thinking of, but it's not like upfront and center. And then in terms of AI integration, again, this is all kind of new, right? And we're thinking of it and we're thinking maybe, okay, well, how do we minimize the risk here? Because one API exploitation, what we're seeing is that it's affecting like so much data, terabytes, right? We've quantified it in terabytes. And in terms of users and customers or individuals whose data is impacted, it's in the millions often, right? That's kind of like very common, which, is obviously, it could be, financially, it could lead to a demise for a company. So it's about minimizing the data, where are you putting your data? How long are you storing it? What's the retention? And what is the approved use of API, right? Just really like gaining that knowledge and I'll say control again, right? Not just allowing it to kind of be behind the scenes, but trying to, establish some guardrails as well. Okay, next slide. Can we move to the next one, please? There we go. So in terms of personal information, right, I think this is kind of, the standard, or I'll say, as much as we can define in one slide in terms of what is personal information. Some of the obvious examples here, like social security number, driver's license, passport numbers, financial account information, health information, all of that kind of illustrated here on this slide. And it's not limited to this, but this is kind of the definition by state law, I'll say. And then again, there could be more in terms of federal or contractual definitions of personal information. So this is what's hiding behind the API, right? And all of this sensitive information that, we're not necessarily thinking of when we're clicking on, let's say, DocuSign or Adobe Sign or going into iManage or some kind of, document management system. We're not thinking of all this, but there could be documents that contain and hold this data, and we're working and clicking away, not thinking that, there's an API sort of bridge there that can potentially compromise all this data. So let's go to, go ahead, Candice.
When you think about it too, this data is concentrated into databases. So a database, it's not like a a server that may have my driver's license picture on it, and that might be my personal information. And then, your tax documents are in your folder. This is a concentrated file that has thousands, if hundreds, hundreds of thousands of records in it that have these fields: social security number, name, address, phone number. Like, it's built to store this. And so the result of that is great because it's easily accessible, it's organized, systems can use it, but it's all in one place. And then you've got an API that is authorized to pull that data and have access to that data when the criteria is met, right? And so you're taking your crown jewels, and we tell this with our clients all the time, like, know where your data is. That's because, where your crown jewels are, where is the data that's going to hurt you, how is it accessible, matters from a risk perspective, right? So in this case, this is kind of an unseen way that someone can access your crown jewels, even if they're stored safely with a third party or safely in your network. Something still needs to talk to that database. That usually is an API, but something needs to talk to that database and pull that data when you need it. And that is the vulnerable part of it. So, yeah.
That's usually like the conversation I'm having with clients, let's say from the education sector or from the health industry, like hospitals. And we ask questions like, well, where do you store your HR or your, student or patient data? And then, well, it doesn't matter. It's off somewhere. It's not in our systems, but it does matter.
Yes.
All right, let's move to the next slide. I just want to be mindful of time here. Again, we're thinking of the state data breach laws here in terms of, safe harbors. If the data is encrypted at rest, then, it may usually is not, that's the data that's framed in terms of the data that is identified as part of a data breach that's triggering reporting obligations. But even without, what rises to the level or what constitutes a data breach by state law, there's still some real consequences here in terms of reputational damage, being on the radar from a state regulator or a federal regulator. There's litigation risk always, right? And we're seeing that trending upwards, and it's just, it's getting more rampant. And I think that even if your data is safe, so to speak, right, or encrypted at rest, password protected, there's still a conversation around that. And I think that it still creates some kind of exposure. From a legal standpoint, we'll of course, analyze it and, decide and determine if it's within or, or outside the scope of potential data breach. But that's just something to highlight here in terms of what the state data breach laws allow. And they have that safe harbor. So I just wanted to highlight that quickly. Next slide, please. Okay, and then here we're talking about inventory, right? It's, again, awareness, right? Know your API, know what exists, what data is behind them. And then I think the $1 million question, who owns them? Who owns the data? And then in terms of access control, really strengthening authentication around the API, least privilege principles, right? That basically means like limiting the use of API, limiting, I don't know, Candice, if you want to speak to that. But usually it just means like, kind of like implementing some kind of control over it.
Yeah. Ultimately, if a user does not need access to it, then they do not have access to it,
Yeah.
right? This is probably more critical for internal databases or things that are, databases that house information that a company uses internally, even if it's housed by a third party like Salesforce, for example. Salesforce is probably the biggest example that
Yeah.
can relate to most people. It has customer information that is important to the client itself, and they don't want that leaked out anywhere. But the data is not housed or owned, or the data is owned by the client but not housed with the client. And in order to access it, you have to use the Salesforce platform, right? So who owns that? Like, is it who owns the Salesforce relationship? Is it if there's an issue with Salesforce and its API, do you know what to do? If you find out, if you get an email tomorrow and says, "Hey, I'm a hacker. I stole your data from Salesforce through a Salesforce vulnerability," who's responsible for that? Is it Salesforce? Is it us? What does the contract say? Like what are you? So those types of questions come up a lot with the API abuse cases.
Yeah. And in terms of establishing some kind of control around it, I think monitoring and testing is critical too, right? Conducting like regular security audits around the API. I think we talked a lot about that third party oversight there in terms of the vendors, the tools, and just knowledge, right? And having visibility about like what's being used, what data is being exposed, and thinking in terms of governance, ownership, again, accountability, because that is all going to creep up, if and when the API is exploited and there is, a massive data breach. So you want to think about it before, not after.
Yeah, and interesting point about that. If you have, we've seen this recently, we've had clients ask, if you if you purchase, let's say a platform to use to store data, third party, you don't own it, can you conduct a pen test against it? More often than not, the answer is no. It's usually in their contract that they don't allow that. So how do you test that security? So there's a whole bunch of things that are coming to light with kind of this API highlight.
And it's expensive, right? Like even if you
Mm-hmm.
are allowed to, conduct a pen test, it's like that's an added cost to doing business. It's not as simple as, I have the right to inspect my health record, so I'm going to ask, my provider to send over my
Yep.
dental X-rays or whatever. So
Yep.
I think that, yeah, in terms of, doing business expenses, that it becomes costly too, even
Mm-hmm.
from a preventative standpoint.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. We have about 10 minutes. Let's see how we can get some of that. Final takeaways. There we go, Candice. We did it.
So if you leave here with anything, let it be that one, you utilize APIs every day, every hour. By being here, you've utilized one. When you log into for your work every day, you're utilizing an API of some sort. Anytime you enter data into an online platform, you're using an API. Think of that in your personal life, in your business life. Like, it pretty much impacts every facet of our life, like social media, your banking, everything that you enter your information into utilizes an API. So when you really think about the attack surface of APIs, it starts to look very promising to an attacker that's looking for a new place to set their feet down and start collecting data from others and extorting people for it. So it becomes, from a business standpoint, it becomes very important that we understand the security risks involved when we start entering data in to third-party platforms and things like that. Know that with an API, an event that would normally be contained to, let's say, a network can expand way beyond that. So it's something that we should all be aware of. It's something that, I think talks like these, or just general awareness that, hey, these exist, we may want to pay attention to them a little bit more, goes a long way. So hopefully that is what I think would be exceptional if you guys could take away from this talk.
Yeah, and they're not going anywhere, right? And we just some of this is like, the unknown, right? Like we have awareness, we know that API is, everywhere and that we're all using it, but and that we've already seen that it can result in large scale data breach events affecting millions. But I guess, some of this is we don't know where else it's going, right? So
Well,
start
with AI,
right.
especially, like AI works twofold. Yeah, attackers can use it and it can make things easier for them. It's also going to make things easier for us as we start to develop new ways of communication. We start to improve APIs, even API security, honestly. We can't go through millions and millions and millions of API activity logs, right? But AI might be able to. So, is there a world where APIs are being monitored more frequently or heavily than they are today? Yes, absolutely, especially with AI. I think it's an amplifier of whatever you're trying to do. So as they start to integrate it more and more into everything, really cybersecurity in general, being the focus here, then I think as our defenses go up, attacks change, attacks morph into something else. We saw that with ransomware over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, ransomware looked very different than it does today. And it'll evolve similar to that. It it doesn't benefit us if we're not aware of it, right?
Right.
And so understanding, especially if you're building a business or you're playing a critical role in business, especially data management, or you're handling a lot of sensitive data, understand how someone can get that data, what you can do to restrict access to that data. And APIs should be a discussion point in that discussion. So it can't just be, oh yeah, we have this database, it's housed in our network. No one can walk into our building and touch it. They have to scan their fingerprint and their eyes and all that stuff. Okay, well, how does something normally communicate to that database? And is that secured or is that monitored directly? Because what we're seeing today is that the answer to that question is no. It's, hey, we have this software, it sits internally, you have to be in our network, and then we're looking at the logs like, oh yeah, they VPN'd in and took everything out. So it doesn't, it has to be monitored directly. And I don't know that the technology today can really support that at full scale. I think we'll get there, but it is a lot more data than we're accustomed to. I don't know if any of you have seen firewall logs, but they are extensive. And imagine someone trying to read all of that. It's millions of lines. It's just impossible for a human to do. So it needs to be programmatic. Yeah.
We can go to the next slide, Madison. Questions? Let's see what's in the chat here.
If you do have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat.
I think one of the things on everyone's notepad must be to go back and ask who is responsible for APIs in the organization and actually get a plan around that, maybe.
Well, if you want to see everyone point fingers at each other, then you can ask
Yeah.
that question. So typically, and it depends, like if you are the owner, like if you're a company that develops an API, generally speaking, internally, it is a group effort. You've got people designing it, you've got people creating it, you've got people. So from a development standpoint, that's usually a group effort. Now, from if a consumer of that API, oftentimes what I see is it lands with whoever has the relationship with that vendor, right? So if you've got a account manager or sales manager and they are or finance, even I've even seen finance be a part of that discussion where they've purchased a platform and they have the relationship with that, then when there is an issue, it's, hey, finance person, like, what's going on? Like, they're like, I have no idea. So, and then it moves to security. So, yeah, I really do think that that's a pretty decent gray area.
You've got one question there. How will quantum computing impact security of APIs, tokens,
Ah,
and encryption?
I think just like AI is an amplifier. So, quantum computing allows for a lot more to be done very, very, very quickly. I think we saw something similar recently where, or we say recently, it was probably 5 years ago now, where they MD5, the hash value. So they were able to have two files with the same hash value, which previous to that, it was never possible. That was kind of the tried and true. And they've since had to develop other types of hash algorithms. It's very similar to that. So I think that again, it's really an amplifier. As we start to increase our technology and our capability with technology, the things that we're accustomed to from a security standpoint is going to change. Things that are hard to get into today are going to be easier to get into tomorrow, ultimately. And so, from our standpoint, first of all, that's job security for me. But from our standpoint, it really becomes, are we able to keep up? Are we able to even stay ahead in some cases? And hopefully with talks like these, we can at least keep up with the discussion on APIs and whatnot. I think Jamie's question's for you, Maria. Is it possible to ask third-party providers to provide certificate of insurance?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And again, I think because it's a little bit, uncharted territory or maybe somewhat chartered, I think that's a yes, right? And it's part of like knowing, the use of AI and understanding the use and kind of getting assurances, knowing if it's being monitored, any kind of security audits, understanding like what is it that we're using and how can it potentially affect our business, right? And I'm speaking, from a client standpoint, asking a third party. Absolutely. I think be as aggressive as you want to be, to get that information and establish some kind of, comfort, if I dare use that word, around the API.
I'll take Dan's question. So from a containment perspective, it varies greatly. And the reason why is it because, again, APIs are so integrated, SaaS platforms are so integrated to business operations. One of the interesting parts of this type of attack is it doesn't take down operations. It's really just pulling data. It's everything's intact. They just were able to grab something they shouldn't have been able to grab. So do you pull the plug and kill your own business to stop the bleed, so to speak, causing more operational harm than previously existed? And that is a pure business call. We have had some clients do exactly that. They basically halt their operations, and until they can get either assurance from the third party it's fixed, or they fix it themselves if it's homegrown. But in some cases, like that large retailer that I was talking about earlier, obviously they can't do that. They're global. There's no way that they're going to ever do that. So their choice was to accept the risk of keeping that open until it was fixed. And it was homegrown, so they were able to fix it very quickly. So it really does matter, like how impactful that data is to the business operations at hand. Because 99 times out of 100, the business operations aren't impacted with this type of attack. It's just data extortion. So.
Perfect. Candice, right to the top of the hour. Candice, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Maria, thank you. Always appreciate your time. And to all of our listeners out there, thank you very much for attending today. I hope you got a lot out of it. You can see the contact information for the presenters up on screen there. If you've got any questions, please feel free to reach on out. And thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.